for critics of the Justice Department and of FBI to just make stuff up. And I think that for that reason, it's necessary to come out strong today and explain the process, explain the policy, and try to assure the public that things are being done on the up and up.
And Barbara, we talked to Danny, we talked to Ken. I wonder what you are making of the new reporting today that Trump received a subpoena for the documents at Mar-a-Lago back in the spring, actually. How does that fill out the picture of how we got the FBI search on Monday to begin with?
Yeah, that's a really interesting new detail. Ordinarily, you want to get the evidence you need by the least intrusive means possible. So the least intrusive would be a request to voluntarily turn it over. That appeared to not be effective. The next step that's less intrusive than a search warrant is a subpoena, because it basically says to the person, give us this stuff. We've got a court order for it. If you don't, you could face contempt of court and even jail. But it does not entitle us to come into your house and rummage through your stuff. And so that's more of an intermediate step. The fact that happened and was also futile, I think, is what the Justice Department would point to say, yes, a search warrant is a pretty drastic measure, but we tried everything else, and he wouldn't give them over. So we were left with no choice but to use the search warrant. And I think that's an important fact for the public understanding that their first go-to step wasn't the most aggressive.
And Barbara, there are some unverified reports that some of the documents may have been classified. What would be the legal implications of that, if true?
Well, it could bring with it additional criminal charges. It's a crime just to take away and remove government records under the Presidential Records Act. But if those documents are also classified, that could violate other statutes as well. There's a 5-year felony for that. And the reason is that it's a serious crime because classified documents are, by definition, documents the disclosure of which would cause grave damage to the national security of the United States. And so it just amps up the consequences and the danger if somebody is mishandling not just government documents, but classified documents.
Absolutely. It would be a national security risk, especially considering Mar-a-Lago has different security requirements than, say, the White House. And I also wanted to get your take on the surge of threats or alleged threats to the FBI that we've been seeing since their search of Mar-a-Lago. What's your take?
Well, I think it is exactly like what we saw happen on January 6th. The president expresses his displeasure, and there are people out there who will take that as a call to arms. There's a term for this. It's called stochastic fear. It is when someone, a leader, that demonstrates his displeasure. It'd be a shame if something should happen to my enemy, or will anyone rid me of this troublesome priest? Somebody's going to take that bait and engage in violence. And so I think that today's remarks are at least in part designed to kind of turn down that rhetoric.
And Barbara, I wonder, in all the events that have been happening, right? Monday's search, today's press conference that's just minutes away, has anything surprised you?
Well, the fact that they're having a press conference does surprise me. It is a tried and true by the book method that you don't speak other than in court. And for a search warrant, which is under seal, you don't speak until charges are filed or the person files a lawsuit for return of property. And so the fact that they're speaking does suggest to me that this is an extraordinary step, but I suppose these are also extraordinary times. We talk about how it's important when you're investigating something high profile to do it by the book. Well, times have changed. Maybe it's time for the book to change as well. And maybe that's what we're seeing today.
And you say the fact that the press conference is happening is a surprise to you. What are the legal risks of doing this with an open investigation?
Well, there's the risk of violating a court's order to seal a document. Matters are sealed at order of the court. And so you can't just violate it because you feel like it. And so Merrick Garland has to be very careful about what he says today, not to violate that order. There is also the risk that any criminal case that follows from this, charges for mishandling government property or mishandling classified information, there's a concern that there will be a motion filed by the Trump team that these remarks were inappropriate and somehow a jury pool by making statements outside of the normal court proceedings in the four corners of the charging document. And so there's some real risk talking here today, saying anything disparaging about Donald Trump. Instead, that's why I expect it to be more about the process than about any particulars of this case.
Barbara, I want you to stay with us, but I also want to bring back in our NBC legal analyst, Danny Savalos. So, Danny, I just asked Barbara if anything has surprised her when it comes to this Mar-a-Lago search with this hearing, or this press conference we're about to have from Attorney General Merrick Garland in just a few minutes. Has anything surprised you? And if so, what and why?
Well, Barb McQuade took the words out of my mouth. I'm just going to take the words right back out of hers, because I totally agree that the biggest surprise is that we're staring at a podium waiting for Merrick Garland to come out and explain, give a status update on why, presumably, they executed a search warrant at the home and office of Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, because DOJ is not in the business of status updates. They're not in the business of explaining where they are in the process of an investigation. Oh, once someone's indicted, they'll come out with diagrams, with pictures, with PowerPoints, and explain maybe who has been indicted. They will put it up on their website and allow you to download the indictment, but not before, not during the investigation. And there are good reasons for that. Not only do you not want to tip off the people you're investigating, but you don't necessarily want to cast aspersions, essentially, at somebody who is innocent, whose property may be searched, which theoretically could be Mar-a-Lago. I mean, that's really what a search warrant is. A search warrant is about the property and the fact that evidence of a crime is likely to be there. It does not accuse a specific person of a crime. So there are many long-standing good reasons why DOJ doesn't give status updates like this. But as Barb said, maybe times are changing, and maybe that's a good thing.
Danny and Barbara, NBC News legal analysts, thank you both so much for breaking all that down. Now I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Ron Allen. He's outside the former president's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. Ron, it's good to see you. So what are you hearing? What are you seeing?
The president's been noticeably quiet, which is unusual for former President Trump, but he has been very quiet. We're not even sure of his location, whether he is here in Bedminster or traveling somewhere, or what exactly he is doing. His social media accounts have also been quiet. We were looking at The Truth, his own social media account, and there's not much on there, as has been the case over the past couple of days when he was going on about this being a witch hunt, about how unfair all this was, how politically motivated these investigations have been. So he has been relatively extremely quiet, and that's sort of eerie because it's not the norm, and you don't know what to expect. But that's the situation here. Merrick Garland, we expect to talk about the DOJ investigation, not necessarily about the investigation that has to do with the Manhattan District Attorney and the New York State Attorney General, that civil matter, and the criminal matter dealing with the Trump family business. We think this is going to be the press conference coming up, the statements coming up by Merrick Garland having to do with the situation at Mar-a-Lago and the federal DOJ and FBI's concerns about documents, separate investigation about documents, about confidential documents, about classified documents, and on the other hand, about the Trump family business, which was the issue yesterday before the state attorney general, where he took the fifth some 440 times. So like everyone else, we stand by to see what the attorney general has to say. And again, we have not heard from former President Trump, which is somewhat unusual, but we will probably hear something after Merrick Garland makes his remarks.
Definitely unusual, but I know that you'll be watching that closely. And Danny, I want to bring you back in because we see Ron, he's standing right in front of Trump's golf course in New Jersey. I wonder, what are the chances that another one of Trump's residences or businesses is searched? Is that something we could know, given what seems to be a more public-facing approach to this investigation at the moment?
Oh, that's hard to say. I mean, on the one hand, it may be the case that the problem that DOJ perceived with noncompliance with a subpoena was something that was only happening at Mar-a-Lago. Or it could be the case that the DOJ only believes that these documents were taken to Mar-a-Lago. That is a really interesting prospect, that these documents could be in any number of different Trump properties, homes, residences throughout the country, including New York and New Jersey, other places where Donald Trump spends a lot of time. But as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any indication that DOJ intends to expand its execution of search warrants anywhere else. But keep in mind, the day before these search warrants were executed, we knew nothing about them. That's how the DOJ does its business. And that's why it has a greater than 90% conviction rate, because it's very good at its job and it keeps its investigation successfully under wraps. So if DOJ is contemplating executing search warrants at other Trump properties, I promise you two things. We probably don't know it. And number two, Merrick Garland will likely not signal that today.
And Ron, I know you're in New Jersey, just a few steps away from Trump's golf course. You mentioned he's been a bit silent right now, which is unusual for him. But what was he saying after this Monday raid? Talk to us about the tone that you're getting, both on his property but online as well.
The president was combative, as has been his custom. He and after the deposition yesterday and before it, he and Letitia James are adversaries. There is no love lost between them. She often makes very bold statements about how no one is above the law and about how she is going after people like President Trump and the former New York governor, Cuomo. On the other hand, former President Trump has called her a racist person who was politically motivated and who's built her political career on going after him. So there has really been very strong language back and forth between the two of them. Although Mr. Trump did say in a statement yesterday that the deposition was professional, we know that the Attorney General was in the room for part of it. In terms of his social media, the truth, there was one posting where he was making the allegation that President Obama had taken some 30 million or a huge number of documents out of the White House. And was this the same thing? He was making a comparison. There's no proof or no evidence that the claim that he is making about what President Obama did or didn't do is true. We haven't checked it out, but it doesn't seem to be true. It's, again, the sort of fodder that goes out there to his followers, the sort of victimhood where he says, what about somebody else? What about somebody else? And he has made this claim about President Obama supposedly taking documents out of the White House and promising to digitize them and not doing so. So there's that. Again, we have not heard much from President Trump over the past number of hours, but I expect that as soon as Mr. Garland is finished, we will hear something from Mr. Trump. Back to you.
NBC correspondent Ron Allen in Bedminster, New Jersey. Thank you so much. Now, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli in South Carolina with President Biden. Mike, it's good to see you. So how does the Biden administration feel about all of DOJ with former President Trump right now?
Well, of course, politically right now, the White House has not welcomed this news. You look at the political position that President Biden has been in for much of this year with his approval rating sinking, and they've had just about as good a period of good news for this administration in the last few weeks than at any time really this year especially. And they wanted the focus this week to be on the legislative successes, the Inflation Reduction Act poised to pass the House tomorrow, the other bipartisan bills the president signed into law earlier this week. So in that respect, in the short term, this is unwelcome. But when you look at the broader perspective here of the White House, this is a president in President Biden who promised throughout the campaign to restore the independence of the Justice Department. And so what we see happening this week with law enforcement officials taking unprecedented actions to search the home of a former president, you clearly have separation in this Justice Department from the White House. In fact, the White House saying earlier this week that President Biden himself learned of that search at Mar-a-Lago from media reports. And just in the last hour, as we learned that Attorney General Garland was poised to make some sort of public statement, the White House yet again said they learned of his plans to make that statement only through public media reports. And so in the context of what President Biden promised to do to restore the soul of America, to restore a sense of law in this country and the independence of the rule of law, they see what Garland's independence in this moment as proof of that fact. And so they're welcoming it, obviously, in the respect of it fulfills a promise from the president, while assuring us and repeatedly telling us that they had no knowledge of what the Justice Department is doing, and that's exactly the way it should be.
And Mike, very quickly, I know President Biden has said he believes in the independence of the DOJ. So what kind of line does he need to walk here? He hasn't said anything about the investigation overtly so far.
Yeah, and I was among those reporters yesterday as the president was traveling here to South Carolina who tried to get, knowing this might be the last time we had a chance to talk to him while he's on vacation, to weigh in on this. And sometimes the president is certainly willing to come over and engage with reporters. You would think he especially wanted to talk about the legislative successes. But this is a president who knows what is at stake here, and they can't be seen, especially with Republicans quickly accusing the Biden administration of politicizing, in their view, the Justice Department with this raid of former President Trump. Biden needs to keep that law enforcement action at arm's length and make it clear he has no role in any of the decisions that are being made at the moment.
Mike Memoli in South Carolina, thank you so much. Let's bring back in Danny Savalos and Barbara, our legal analysts. So what are you hearing from your fellow analysts about this event that's going on right now? I know you both have said it's unprecedented, but Barbara, would love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think that it is really interesting that it demonstrates that we live in such different times. It used to be that I think the public gave benefit of the doubt to law enforcement, to the FBI, and there was a presumption of regularity that we'd wait and see. We'd assume that they were acting in good faith unless we saw otherwise. And now it seems like that has been turned on its head through the disinformation efforts of Donald Trump. This allegation that evidence has been planted, completely baseless. But now the narrative isn't so much prove that evidence was planted, it's prove that it wasn't. And it's very difficult to disprove a negative. We've seen this with election fraud as well. In the same way people will deny the election, you'll say, well, where's the evidence of fraud? They'll say, where's the evidence that there wasn't? And I think we are going in a very dangerous place when it's very difficult for people to know what to believe, when you've got people very willing to throw out their completely baseless information in an effort to distort and manipulate the public.
Danny, I wonder, what about you? Is there any opposition to this press conference that's about to happen? Are you hearing that in legal circles, that perhaps this is not the right thing to do?
No, not necessarily. I mean, most of my legal circles are defense attorneys, and defense attorneys would always welcome the idea that DOJ would give a press conference about the status of an ongoing investigation, because it's just something that's never done, that it certainly is interesting, if nothing else. I seriously doubt that this is going to herald a change in DOJ for their run-of-the-mill cases, or at least their cases involving defendants and suspects that no one has ever heard of. They will continue to not comment on investigations until an indictment or some other very good reason to comment on them. Again, that's for good reason. There are valid and important reasons why DOJ doesn't comment on ongoing investigations. But I wouldn't say that this is going to be a sign of changes to come. It might be a sign of changes to come as to Trump investigations, or perhaps investigations of someone like Rudy Giuliani or someone else who is high profile in Trump's circle. But I don't expect that this will change DOJ policy of not commenting and not holding press conferences to comment on ongoing investigations. This system has worked very well for them for many years. They are devastatingly effective at securing convictions in virtually all of their cases. Over 90% end in pleas, and those that go to trial, about 90% of them end in guilty verdicts. So DOJ knows what it's doing. This may be a deviation from what it normally does, but it is probably a deviation and nothing more, at least a deviation when the case is just so political like this one. As for the run-of-the-mill cases, DOJ will probably continue to not comment on ongoing investigations until they're ready to indict.
And I wanted to dig a little deeper with both of you into the Presidential Records Act. For our viewers who aren't familiar, it's that act of Congress that governs official records of the president and vice president and any records received after around 1981. So talk to us about, to the best of your knowledge, how this exactly works and why it's so important. Barbara?
Presidential records belong to the United States. It is part of our history. They're retained by the National Archives, so that we have a recording of what happened during the Trump administration and during his presidency. They don't belong to him, and so they're not his to take. Now, the interesting thing about the Presidential Records Act is there isn't much penalty there. It's a bit of a toothless statute. But there are other statutes that apply to this situation. There is a statute for the removal of government records. It was previously a felony, but ironically, it was President Trump himself who signed the bill into law, making it a 5-year felony. That makes it a crime to take away documents that belong to the United States. And then, of course, mishandling of classified information, depending on one's intent, can be anywhere from grossly negligently mishandling information, all the way up to violations of Espionage Act.
And Barbara, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I see that AG Merrick Garland.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Kate Snow.
Good day, everyone. We're coming on the air with some breaking news. Attorney General Merrick Garland about to make his first public comments since the FBI searched former President Donald Trump's residence in Florida earlier this week. This will be the first time anyone from the Department of Justice has commented since the Mar-a-Lago search. About a dozen boxes worth of materials were seized from a safe and a storage area within Mr. Trump's residence. This statement from the Attorney General comes, of course, amid growing calls from Mr. Trump's supporters to explain what was behind that search. NBC's Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian has been following this story all along. Ken, what do we expect here?
Kate, I'm not expecting to learn a lot of new facts about the search. I'm prepared to be proven wrong. I think I'm expecting a primer on the process and why the Justice Department conducts searches pursuant to court orders, what are the circumstances, and possibly also some pushback on some of the criticism that the department has been taking from, as you mentioned, from Trump supporters who say that this is unfair, that it's politically motivated. There have even been remarks by some Trump lawyers that the FBI may have planted evidence. I expect Merrick Garland to push back on that. But Merrick Garland is a cautious, careful institutionalist who believes in the rules and believes in protocol. And protocol in this case says that the Justice Department does not talk about pending criminal investigations, no matter how badly people want them to do that. And so I don't expect him to talk about in detail about what, for example, what led the FBI to pursue this court-ordered search.
All right, All right, Ken, here's the Attorney General now.
Good afternoon. Since I became Attorney General, I have made clear that the Department of Justice will speak through its court filings and its work. Just now, the Justice Department has filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal a search warrant and property receipt relating to a court-approved search that the FBI conducted earlier this week. That search was of premises located in Florida belonging to the former president. The department did not make any public statements on the day of the search. The former president publicly confirmed the search that evening, as is his right. Copies of both the warrant and the FBI property receipt were provided on the day of the search to the former president's counsel, who was on site during the search. The search warrant was authorized by a federal court upon the required finding of probable cause. The property receipt is a document that federal law requires law enforcement agents to leave with the property owner. The department filed the motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, the surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter. Faithful adherence to the rule of law is the bedrock principle of the Justice Department and of our democracy. Upholding the rule of law means applying the law evenly, without fear or favor. Under my watch, that is precisely what the Justice Department is doing. All Americans are entitled to the even-handed application of the law, to due process of the law, and to the presumption of innocence. Much of our work is by necessity conducted out of the public eye. We do that to protect the constitutional rights of all Americans and to protect the integrity of our investigations. Federal law, long-standing department rules, and our ethical obligations prevent me from providing further details as to the basis of the search at this time. There are, however, certain points I want you to know. First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter. Second, The department does not take such a decision lightly. Where possible, it is standard practice to seek less intrusive means as an alternative to a search and to narrowly scope any search that is undertaken. Third, let me address recent unfounded attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and Justice Department agents and prosecutors. I will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked. The men and women of the FBI and the Justice Department are dedicated, patriotic public servants. Every day, they protect the American people from violent crime, terrorism, and other threats to their safety while safeguarding our civil rights. They do so at great personal sacrifice and risk to themselves. I am honored to work alongside them. This is all I can say right now. More information will be made available in the appropriate way and at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Attorney General, the former president said this
FBI agents. Thank you all for your questions, but as I said, this is all I can say at this time.
All right, we've been listening to the Attorney General of the United States. Brief comments there. Let me bring back our Justice and Intelligence correspondent, Ken Delanian, who's been following all of this. In the beginning of his statement there, Ken, he said, we have filed a motion in the Southern District of Florida to unseal the search warrant, meaning we'll be able to see what they were after on Monday.
Absolutely right, Kate. In fact, we have this motion now. It doesn't reveal the details. It's asking the judge to unseal this affidavit. And just so people understand, this affidavit, which normally would be sworn out by an FBI agent, this is how the FBI communicates to the judge the probable cause that they believe exists to show that a crime had been committed and that there was evidence of that crime present at former President Donald Trump's residence at Mar-a-Lago. So this is the whole shebang. If there was a confidential human source, whatever led up to this search would be generally in an affidavit like this. They may redact names. And what's clear here is that this is a motion by the Justice Department asking the judge to unseal. So an interesting question will be, what is the Donald Trump position now? Will they oppose this effort to unseal the warrant, or will they support it, Kate?
And what will the judge do, right? Because ultimately it's the judge's call.
Right, but generally the interest in sealing is a law enforcement interest. It's the Justice Department that demands the seal to protect the confidentiality of sources, to protect the nature of the investigation. So often when the prosecutors say unseal, it gets unsealed.
And Ken, we also heard the Attorney General say, I personally approve the decision to seek a search warrant. That was obviously a very intentional thing to say out loud.
It was indeed, and it was what we all expected had happened, but it was interesting to hear it confirmed. And then we also, of course, heard him push back in a general way against the attacks that he's perceiving happening leveled against FBI agents and prosecutors who are being accused without evidence, really, of acting in a political way or an unfair way, Kate.
Let me go to NBC's Vaughn Hilliard. He's in Palm Beach, Florida, right outside Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. He joins us now. Vaughn, I imagine it's too quickly to get any reaction from folks inside the Trump camp, but clearly this was orchestrated by the Attorney General to address some of the concerns that you've been hearing from those close to former president.
Right, Kate, for about 48 hours, this was allowed to fester, and in large part, it was Trump and allies of his within the Republican Party who filled the void there, not only calling into question what the Department of Justice was looking for, calling it a political witch hunt, a political operation to undermine him as he looks toward his own potential 2024 presidential run here. But in that meanwhile, this was Donald Trump ultimately also at the same time saying that they were not going to turn over and release publicly the search warrant that was handed over to them. Nor were they going to turn over that property receipt, which they are in custody of presently. And that's where you hear Merrick Garland lay out that they have filed that motion to unseal both the search warrant and that property receipt, which the Trump team already has in their possession, and they have declined to turn over. And I think it's interesting because I was talking with a source familiar on Trump's side of this, and they had said that the burden was on the Department of Justice to be transparent about why they issued this search warrant and wanted to execute it. But now what what you're hearing from the Department of Justice is saying essentially that the onus now turns back to the Trump team. I think the one other note on this here is when you're looking at the political ramifications of this, Kate, here, there's a lot of question marks as to why these documents were ultimately secured by the Department of Justice as part of this warrant. Because to our understanding, we have been told that a subpoena was issued to Donald Trump this spring. And then on June 3rd, there was a meeting in which Donald Trump and his lawyers turned over several boxes of material to the Department of Justice. Ultimately, it's clear that the Department of Justice, the FBI, did not get what exactly they were looking for, and that ultimately led to the search warrant executed earlier this week.
Yeah, so this doesn't just begin in the last couple of days. This is something that has some history back to the spring. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you. Let me go to Chief White House Correspondent Kristen Welker, who's with me now. Kristen, first off, I saw reporting that a senior White House official said the White House and President Biden did not have any knowledge that this was happening today, that Merrick Garland would be addressing the press. Let's start there.
Well, that's absolutely right, Kate. And President Biden has been trying to keep his distance. In fact, when that search occurred on Monday, when we all learned about it, the White House was quick to say that he hadn't been given a heads up about that either. He, of course, campaigned on a promise to keep his distance from the Justice Department. Now, in the early days of his presidency, he did have what many considered a misstep when he seemed to weigh in on what he thought should happen to those who did not comply with subpoenas. He walked those comments back, though, made it very clear he sees the Justice Department as independent from the White House, trying to draw a sharp contrast, of course, with his predecessor. So we are seeing that yet again play out today, when the White House making it very clear that he didn't have any type of a heads up on what the Attorney General was going to say or that he was going to speak at all. The president right now is vacationing in South Carolina, Kate.
Well, Kristen, this is going to have political ramifications, right? A Trump spokesperson earlier today called the search unprecedented, absolutely unnecessary raid, in their words, said the Department of Justice has been, quote, weaponized. How is the White House dealing with that political climate that we're in right now?
Well, that's a key question, because remember, the president was poised to take somewhat of a victory lap. He's had a number of legislative victories. He's poised to likely have another one tomorrow when the House passes a key piece of legislation. And so he was going to put his focus on the midterms. And the question becomes, is the White House concerned that that messaging is going to be soaked up by all of this focus now on this search and on his predecessor, former President Trump? The administration insisting that it's not going to detract away from their core messaging. But just taking a step back, Kate, to something that you said at the top, that the Attorney General was talking today in the wake of pressure from Trump supporters to come out and explain his actions. He was also getting pressured from those inside the Justice Department. I've been talking to current and former Justice Department officials who say they wanted to hear an explanation from the Attorney General about why this dramatic step was necessary. And so now we have it. It's also worth noting that FBI Director Christopher Wray was asked yesterday about former President Trump's baseless claim that FBI agents may have planted evidence, and he said he's not going to comment on anything that has to do with this investigation. And you really heard this robust defense from the Attorney General, essentially answering all of the criticism that may be lobbed against the FBI, against the Department of Justice, making it very clear that this was an action that he approved, that he believed was necessary.
And Kristen, indeed, he also said that the FBI agents do this work at personal sacrifice and risk. He said, I won't stand by silently when their integrity is being unfairly attacked. Kristen Welker at the White House for us. Kristen, thank you. That concludes our coverage for this hour. We're going to have much more tonight on NBC Nightly News. For all of us here at NBC News, I'm Kate Snow. Thank you for watching.
Welcome back. I'm Zinklea Samoa. We're following breaking news at this hour. Attorney General Merrick Garland speaking from the Justice Department just minutes ago, following the FBI search at the Mar-a-Lago home of former President Donald Trump. These were his first public comments since the search. You watched it live right here on NBC News Now. Garland saying the Justice Department will move to unseal the search warrant.
The department filed the motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, the surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter.
A source confirmed to NBC News that the former president received a subpoena for documents in the spring. The FBI believed he still had them in his possession, but had not turned them over to the National Archives. The threats to law enforcement are growing following the Mar-a-Lago search. The FBI says an armed man tried to enter a field office in Cincinnati with a nail gun and a rifle before fleeing. It is not clear whether this is connected to what happened at Mar-a-Lago. So to break all this down, we're going to bring back in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. So Danny, Attorney General Garland had been facing a lot of pressure to say something about this case. Of course, that was unprecedented. And what he had to say was substantive, but also short. So what are your biggest takeaways?
Just as expected, not a lot of information about the underlying investigation. In fact, Merrick Garland said as much. I'm not going to comment on the underlying investigation. Defended the brave men and women of the Department of Justice and the FBI. That was pretty standard. I expected that as well. Standing up for them, fighting back against what he perceives as unfair criticism and more than fair criticism. I mean, more than unfair criticism, beyond the pale type criticism of his FBI agents and his Department of Justice team. So not a big surprise there. It will be interesting to see that motion to unseal, what that tells us, if anything. It may not tell us a whole lot, but once that affidavit in support comes out, if it emerges, that will give us some real information. The search warrant itself may not give us too much information, but that affidavit, usually prepared by a special agent, really will detail a lot about an investigation. So when and if that comes to light, that will give us a pretty good guide. But that's not the kind of thing that normally gets released early in an investigation. So some things of interest, no surprise.
Yeah, Danny, and you spoke to it, but we heard Garland speak pretty passionately about what he called unfounded attacks on law enforcement since that search. And I want to play a little bit more of what Garland had to say generally, and we'll talk on the other side.
First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter. Second, the department does not take such a decision lightly. Where possible, it is standard practice to seek less intrusive means as an alternative to a search and to narrowly scope any search that is undertaken. Third, let me address recent unfounded attacks on the professionalism of the FBI and Justice Department agents and prosecutors. I will not stand by silently when their integrity is unfairly attacked.
Strong words there. So what's your reaction to what the AG said?
I was surprised that the AG felt the need to come out and defend the men and women of the FBI and the Justice Department. But in a sense, I was not surprised. I mean, that kind of fidelity is a common feature of Department of Justice. So not that big of a surprise. I mean, they view themselves as a brotherhood or sisterhood of folks working towards a common cause, which is justice. And so for that reason, not too surprised that he came out and defended them. But in a sense, it was not something he could have gone either way with that. Could have declined to even give any life to those accusations by not commenting on them, or he could do as he did, which is come out and defend his people, which, of course, they absolutely would have appreciated. So, again, very few surprises today, very short press conference, as expected, and really no real new information about what this investigation is all about. In fact, most of us outside the DOJ have done our own inference drawing and arrived at much more in the way of conclusions than we got from this press conference.
And Danny, I want to lastly just ask you, I know the AG said that they have filed a motion to unseal those records, that warrant. What impact do you think that will have?
It's significant. It's going to give us information about, especially the search warrant itself. We'll just describe with particularity the place to be searched and the things to be seized. But there's a lot to be gleaned from even that information. The real key is always the affidavit. The affidavit is one of the first things I go to when I get discovery. I want to see what the affidavit says, because it'll even have more information than the indictment. And of course, there's been no indictment in this situation so far. But the point is, indictments are a truncated, reduced version of the facts, just enough to indict someone, and not so much to reveal your hand. Same too with an affidavit of probable cause. The agent doesn't want to reveal everything DOJ has, but just enough to convince a judge that it is more likely than not that there is evidence of criminal activity at a particular location. So the affidavit of probable cause, if released, is always a very interesting document for review.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos keeping us updated on that breaking news. Thank you so much. Now, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Ron Allen in Bedminster, New Jersey. Ron, good to see you again. So I know that you're just a few miles away from Trump's golf course. What are you hearing from the former president and his allies this afternoon?
We're seeing a post on